The evening was quiet, except for the steady sound of rain hitting the window panes. Laura Bennett sat in her living room, a half-finished cup of coffee beside her. Her husband, Richard, had called an hour ago saying he'd be late again. Lately, late again had become a routine sentence. She didn't question it anymore. Or at least she told herself she didn't. But deep down, there was a small, uneasy feeling that never went away. At 9:30, a soft knock broke through the silence. Wasn't loud or hurried. It was gentle, hesitant, almost afraid. Laura frowned. Few people visited at this hour, and the rain made it unlikely someone would stop by casually. She opened the door and found Melissa Carter standing there, her neighbor from down the street. Melissa was in her mid-30s, a few years younger than Laura, usually full of laughter and warmth. But tonight, she looked like she had been crying for hours. "Melissa, are you all right?" Laura asked, her concern genuine. Melissa's lips trembled as she nodded, though clearly she wasn't fine. "Laura, I'm sorry, I didn't know where else to go." Without another word, Laura stepped aside. "Come in." Melissa walked in slowly, her wet coat dripping on the floor, her hands clutching a small handbag, as if it were her only lifeline. Laura guided her to the couch and brought a towel from the hallway. Melissa took it with a quiet thank you. But her hands were shaking so much she could barely hold it. For a long minute, neither of them spoke. Laura watched her neighbor's trembling lips, the redness in her eyes. The way her shoulders slumped under invisible weight. Something terrible had happened. Laura could feel it. Finally, Melissa whispered, "It's about your husband." Those words froze the air around them. Laura felt her stomach tighten. She set her cup down, her fingers slightly trembling. "What do you mean, about my husband?" Melissa's eyes filled with tears again. "I don't want to hurt you," she said, "but I can't carry it anymore. Richard, he's been seeing me, coming over." For months. Laura blinked as if she hadn't heard correctly. The words didn't register immediately, but when they did, they hit her like a storm. She stared at Melissa, searching for a hint of a lie, a mistake, something to deny. But Melissa's tears were real. Her pain was real. "Why are you telling me this now?" Laura managed to ask, her voice soft, trembling. "Because I ended it tonight," Melissa said, barely audible. "He wanted to come over again, and I told him I couldn't do it anymore. I told him it was wrong, that I was tired of living with guilt. He got angry, said things I wish I could forget. I ran out before he could follow me. I came here because I didn't know where else to go." Laura's throat tightened. Her mind raced through months of strange behavior. The late meetings, the phone calls in the other room, the way Richard had become emotionally distant but overly kind afterward, like a man covering his tracks. She had ignored every sign because she didn't want to believe it. But now, hearing it from Melissa, it was undeniable. She stood silently for a while, her gaze fixed on the floor. Melissa cried quietly, whispering apologies over and over. "I didn't plan it, Laura. I swear. Started so small, friendly talks, a drink one evening when you were away. I should have stopped it before it began. But he kept coming back and I kept giving in. I hate myself for it." Laura wanted to be angry, to shout, to throw her out, to let her pain spill like the rain outside. But instead, she just sat beside her and said, "You should stay tonight." Melissa looked up, shocked. "What? You shouldn't go home in this weather. And you're clearly not okay. Stay here. You can use the guest room." Melissa hesitated. "You don't have to. I'm not doing it for you," Laura said calmly. "I just need time to think." Melissa nodded, too exhausted to argue. She followed Laura upstairs, and within minutes, the house fell into an eerie silence. Laura sat on her bed, staring at the faint reflection of herself in the mirror. Her face looked older, somehow tired, pale, distant. She picked up her phone, thought of calling Richard, then put it back down. There was nothing to say that could undo what she'd just heard. In the middle of the night, Laura heard soft sobs coming from the guest room. For a moment, she almost went in to comfort Melissa, not because she forgave her, but because she understood the loneliness that had led her there. It wasn't just about betrayal. It was about two women, both emotionally abandoned by the same man. The next morning, Richard's note was waiting on the counter. Gone to the office early. See you tonight. It was short and careless, the kind of note a man writes when he believes his secret is still safe. Laura folded it neatly and placed it beside her coffee cup, her mind oddly calm. Melissa came downstairs, her hair tied back, eyes swollen from crying. I'll leave right after breakfast, she said quietly. Stay, Laura replied without looking at her. You don't have to rush. Melissa's expression softened with confusion. You're being kinder than I deserve. I'm not doing this out of kindness, Laura said. I just think it's better to face the truth together, not apart. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table. The air was heavy, but no longer hostile. Laura asked questions when it started, how long it lasted, why Melissa finally stopped. Melissa answered everything honestly. The truth was painful, but it brought clarity. I think I started falling for him, Melissa admitted quietly. But I realized he wasn't in love with anyone. Not you, not me, not even himself. He just needed attention. Laura looked up from her cup. You're right. It's always been that way. Charming when he wants something, distant when he gets it. Shared truth. That quiet understanding built an unexpected bridge between them. They weren't friends that morning, but they weren't enemies either. They were simply two women standing on the same broken ground. By afternoon, the rain had stopped. They stepped onto the porch with coffee mugs in hand. The sun peeked through the clouds, and for the first time in hours, Laura could breathe without feeling the weight of betrayal pressing on her chest. You know, Melissa said softly, you should hate me. Laura shook her head slowly. Hate is easy. Understanding is harder. Melissa smiled faintly. You're stronger than I thought. Maybe I just got tired of pretending everything's fine. Laura replied. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway made both women turn. Richard's silver sedan gleamed under the weak sunlight. He stepped out, straightening his tie, looking as if nothing had changed. But when he saw both women standing together, something in his face shifted confusion, guilt, maybe even fear. Laura, he said, forcing a smile. What's going on, Melissa? Laura crossed her arms. We were just talking about you. Richard blinked, his confident expression fading. Talking about me? Why? Melissa's voice shook, but she stood tall. Because it's time you face what you did, Richard. He opened his mouth, but Laura interrupted. Save it. We both know the truth now. Richard froze. His usual smooth tone failed him. For once, he looked small, cornered. The mask he'd worn for years began to slip. Laura didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply looked him in the eye and said, You broke something in both of us, and I'm not sure you even realize it. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Richard tried to speak, but Laura turned away, walking back into the house. Melissa followed her quietly, leaving him standing in the driveway. Drenched in disbelief inside, Laura closed the door and leaned against it, her hands trembling slightly. That's enough for today, she whispered. Melissa nodded. Will you do? Laura looked out the window, watching Richard's reflection in the glass. I don't know yet, she said. But I know one thing, I'm done being the quiet one. Melissa reached out and gently touched her arm. You don't have to go through this alone. Laura met her gaze. In that moment, she saw not the woman who had betrayed her, but someone who had suffered in the same way. Someone who, strangely, understood her better than anyone else. And though neither of them said it out loud, they both knew whatever came next, their story wasn't over. The next morning began with a silence that carried more weight than any argument could. Laura sat at the breakfast table, staring at the same cup of coffee she hadn't touched. The clock ticked loudly in the background, reminding her how slow time could feel when the truth finally surfaced. Upstairs, Melissa quietly packed her things, still unsure if she should stay or leave. Richard hadn't said a single word since the confrontation the evening before. He had slept in the guest room, or maybe he hadn't slept at all. When Laura heard him walking down the stairs, she didn't lift her head. She could feel his presence, the hesitation in his steps, the discomfort of guilt that hung heavy in the air. "Laura," he began softly. She finally looked up. "You don't need to explain anything," she said calmly. "I've heard enough." Richard ran a hand through his hair. "You think you know everything, but you don't. It wasn't what you think." She let out a faint, tired laugh. "So what was it then?" "A misunderstanding. A mistake that lasted months." He sighed. "I didn't plan for it to happen. Things at home were distant. You were busy. I was stressed." "Melissa was don't," Laura interrupted sharply. "Don't try to make excuses by blaming what I didn't do. You had choices, Richard. You always had choices." He fell silent. The weight of his own actions finally seemed to catch up with him. For the first time, Laura didn't see her husband. She saw a man who had been hiding behind excuses for years. From the stairs, Melissa's voice broke the tension. "Laura, I'll leave now." She had her bag over her shoulder, eyes lowered. "No," Laura said, standing. "Stay for breakfast. You might as well face this too." Melissa froze, surprised. Richard's face turned pale. "Laura, this isn't necessary." "It is," Laura replied, her tone steady. "We've all been pretending for too long. Let's stop now." The three of them sat at the same table, the same one where countless family breakfasts had once been shared with laughter and love. But now there was only silence and the soft sound of rain returning outside. After a long pause, Laura spoke first. "I don't need apologies. I just need honesty. From both of you." Melissa nodded, voice trembling. "I told you everything already. I never meant for it to go that far. It started small. Richard came over one evening when you were away visiting your mother. He said he needed to talk. One thing led to another, and I didn't stop it. I should have." Richard's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Melissa continued, her voice breaking. "It wasn't love. It was confusion, and guilt followed me every day. That's why I came to you. Not to destroy your marriage, but because I couldn't live with the lie anymore." Laura listened quietly. She didn't interrupt or cry this time. She just absorbed every word. When Melissa finished, Laura turned to Richard. "Do you love her?" Richard blinked, clearly unprepared for the question. "No," he said quickly. "It wasn't about love. It was a mistake, and I regret it." "Then what was it about?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The silence spoke louder than any excuse. Laura stood up slowly, pushing her chair back. "You know what hurts the most, Richard? It's not that you cheated. It's that you looked me in the eyes every day and pretended you hadn't. You made me doubt myself instead of your lies." Richard looked down, ashamed. "I didn't want to lose you." "You already did," she said softly. Melissa wiped her tears, whispering, "Laura, I'll leave now. I don't want to make things worse." But Laura stopped her again. "You don't have to leave yet. You told me the truth. That's more than he ever did. And maybe I need someone else who's been hurt by him to help me understand what to do next." For a moment, Richard looked stunned. "You're choosing her over me." Laura looked him straight in the eyes. "I'm choosing honesty over lies." The words hung in the air like a final verdict. Richard had no defense left. He grabbed his coat and walked out, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed through the house, but Laura felt strangely lighter. Melissa sat quietly, unsure what to say. "I didn't expect you to be this calm," she whispered. Laura gave a faint smile. "I've cried enough in silence. Now I just want peace." They spent the rest of the morning in quiet conversation. Melissa shared how Richard had made her believe he was lonely and misunderstood, how he'd spoken softly about Laura being too focused on her work, how he'd painted himself as the victim. Listening to it, Laura realized how well he had played both sides, pretending to be the devoted husband at home while seeking sympathy elsewhere by noon. Laura felt clarity instead of confusion. She understood that Richard's actions weren't about her not being enough, They were about his own emptiness. That realization didn't erase the pain, but it gave her strength when Melissa finally stood to leave. Laura walked her to the door. "Whatever happens next," she said gently, "don't carry this guilt forever. You made a mistake, but you also had the courage to admit it." Melissa nodded, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Laura. I don't deserve your kindness, but I'll never forget it." After Melissa left, the house felt unusually quiet. Laura walked through each room, seeing traces of the life she once thought was perfect. Framed photos, vacations, souvenirs, love letters tucked in drawers. All pieces of a story that now felt like fiction. She picked up one photo, their wedding picture, and stared at the smiles frozen in time. They looked like two strangers now, as the afternoon sun filtered through the curtains. Laura sat by the window and took a deep breath. She wasn't broken. She was free. The truth had hurt, but it had also given her something new, a reason to start over. Later that evening, Richard returned. He didn't knock or call first. He simply walked in looking tired and lost. "Laura, can we talk?" She looked at him calmly. "About what?" "About us. About fixing this. Fixing." She repeated quietly. "You can't fix something you never respected." He stepped closer, desperate. "I made a terrible mistake. I was weak. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm asking for another chance." Laura stood up and faced him. "Richard, I don't hate you, but I don't trust you either. And without trust, there's nothing left to rebuild." He nodded slowly, eyes filled with regret. "So, this is it?" "Yes," she said firmly. "This is it." He looked around the house, their home, one last time. "I'll pack my things tomorrow." "You should," she said softly. "And I hope you find whatever it is you've been searching for." Richard left quietly this time, closing the door behind him. Laura watched him go without tears. There was pain, yes, but also relief. The kind that comes when a wound is finally cleaned instead of covered. That night, Laura sat alone under the soft glow of a lamp. She opened her journal and began to write, not about betrayal, but about strength. She wrote how sometimes people break not because they are weak, but because they've carried too much for too long. She wrote about forgiveness, not the kind given to others, but the kind you give yourself when you decide to let go. Days passed, and the neighborhood soon buzzed with quiet whispers about what had happened. But Laura didn't care. She went on morning walks, cooked for herself, and learned to enjoy her own company again. Melissa moved away not long after, leaving a note that simply said, "Thank you for treating me like a human, even when I didn't deserve it." Months later, Laura found herself standing by the same window where it had all begun. The one where she had waited for Richard so many nights. This time she wasn't waiting for anyone. She smiled softly to herself, knowing that healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant learning to live again. Wiser and stronger, she whispered to the empty room. "Sometimes, the storm you fear the most clears the path you were meant to walk." Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, bright and warm. And for the first time in a long while, Laura felt free. Months had passed since Richard left, and Laura had built a quiet rhythm around her solitude. The house, once filled with tension and unspoken emotions, now felt peaceful. She woke up early, brewed her coffee, and opened the windows to let the morning breeze in. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was hers again. She had learned to enjoy silence without feeling lonely. Still, there were moments when memories returned, like old ghosts, the laughter she once shared with Richard, the holidays spent together, and the dreams they had planned. They didn't hurt as much now, but they lingered, reminding her of everything she had lost and everything she had learned. One evening, Laura was watering the small plants on her porch when she saw a car she hadn't seen in months pull up across the street. It was Richard's. Her heart skipped, not from love or anger, but from the sudden reminder that some chapters, no matter how closed, have a way of knocking one last time. He stepped out, looking thinner, older. His expression carried both nervousness and humility. Laura didn't move. She simply waited, watching as he approached. "Hi, Laura," he said quietly. "Hi." Richard, she replied, her voice steady but distant. I didn't mean to surprise you. I was driving through town and I guess I just wanted to see how you're doing. Laura nodded. I'm fine. Better than before. He smiled faintly. You look better. Peace suits you. There was a pause long enough for both of them to feel the weight of everything left unsaid. Richard finally spoke again. I've been going to therapy, trying to understand why I did what I did. I know I can't undo it, but I wanted you to know that I'm not the same man anymore. Oh. Laura looked at him carefully. His eyes held sincerity, maybe even regret. But she had learned that regret didn't always mean change. That's good, Richard, she said softly. I'm glad you're getting help. I also wanted to say thank you, he continued, for not destroying me when you could have. You had every right to, but you didn't. You just let me go. Laura gave a small, knowing smile. Letting go was the hardest thing I've ever done, but holding on to anger would have hurt me more. He nodded slowly, looking at the ground. Do you ever think about us? She hesitated. Sometimes, but not in the way you think. I remember us as a story that had its time. It wasn't all bad, Richard. We had good years before everything changed. Richard exhaled deeply. I still miss those years. Laura didn't reply. Instead, she stepped aside and gestured toward the porch chairs. You can sit for a while if you want. It's a nice evening. Key smiled gratefully. They sat side by side just like they used to, but the air between them was different, calm, not charged. The sunset painted the sky in soft golds and pinks, and for a while neither of them spoke. Finally, Richard broke the silence. Do you ever think you could forgive me? Laura turned to him. I already did, she said. Not for you, but for me. Forgiveness isn't about pretending it didn't happen. It's about refusing to let it control what happens next. Her words hit him deeply. He nodded, eyes glistening. You always had more strength than me. It's not strength, she said quietly. It's survival. They talked for a little longer about their grown-up kids, mutual friends, the changes in the neighborhood. It was almost surreal to people who had once shared everything, now sitting as polite acquaintances. When he finally stood to leave, Richard looked back at her with a mix of sadness and peace. You deserve happiness, Laura. I hope you find it. She smiled. I already have, Richard. It just looks different now. When he drove away, Laura didn't cry. Instead, she looked up at the fading sunlight and whispered to herself, that chapter is truly over. Weeks later, life surprised her again, not with pain this time, but with something new. A new neighbor moved into the house next door. A retired art teacher named Paul. He was kind, soft-spoken, and carried an easy smile that reminded Laura of calmer days. They met one afternoon when she found him struggling to carry a box of books from his car. Need a hand? Laura asked. He chuckled. That obvious, huh? They laughed, and something about his warmth disarmed her. Over the next few weeks, they often ran into each other at the mailbox, on morning walks, or while tending to their gardens. Conversations grew longer, smiles came easier, and soon enough, friendship felt natural. One evening, Paul invited her for coffee at his place. His living room was cozy, filled with art pieces he had painted over the years, soft landscapes, quiet streets, portraits that carried emotion. Laura was fascinated. These are beautiful, she said, walking around the room. Paul smiled modestly. They're memories. I paint what I miss. What do you miss most? She asked gently. He looked thoughtful. Connection. Not romance, necessarily, just the comfort of being seen by someone who understands. Laura's heart ached a little at that. I know what you mean, she said softly. From that night on, they spent more time together, sharing dinners, watching movies, sometimes just talking for hours about life. There was no rush, no expectation. It was simple and honest to people learning to trust the quiet again. One rainy evening, as they sat on Laura's porch watching the drizzle, Paul turned to her and said, You know, you smile differently now than when I first met you. She laughed lightly. Oh, how's that? It reaches your eyes now, he said. Laura looked at him. And for the first time in a long while, she felt a flutter in her chest, not the sharp sting of heartbreak, but the gentle warmth of possibility. She didn't need to label it. It was enough to simply feel alive again. Months rolled by and life slowly took on new meaning. Laura joined an art class that Paul taught at the local community center. Painting became her new therapy. Through every brush stroke, she expressed feelings she could never put into words: the ache of betrayal, the peace of forgiveness, the joy of rediscovery. Her favorite painting was a sunrise, bright, warm, and endless. She titled it "The Beginning After the End." When Paul saw it, he smiled. "You've come full circle," he said softly. Laura nodded. "I think I finally understand that endings aren't failures. Sometimes they're invitations to start again." Later that evening, as they walked home together, Laura glanced at the stars above. "You ever wonder if things happen for a reason?" Paul shrugged with a gentle smile. "Maybe not for a reason, but definitely for a lesson." Laura laughed softly. "Then I've learned plenty." "Me too," he said. They reached her porch where the light glowed softly. Paul hesitated for a moment, then said, "I'm glad I moved here. I'm glad you did too." Laura replied with a warm smile as he walked away. She watched him disappear into the gentle night. Her heart felt light, not from romance alone, but from peace. She had survived the storm, faced her truth, and allowed herself to heal. And now she was ready for whatever life still had to offer that night. She wrote one final entry in her journal. "Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, it rewrites the future. I thought losing love meant losing life, but maybe it was the beginning of finding myself. Some doors close so better ones can open. Today I finally walked through mine." Laura closed the journal, smiled softly, and turned off the light. The past no longer haunted her. It guided her. She was no longer someone's wife, no longer someone's victim. She was simply Laura, a woman who had learned how to love again, starting with herself and outside. The wind carried the faintest whisper of peace through the quiet neighborhood, as if the world itself was saying, "You made it."